I am open.
Welcome to the debate. Our analysis today, it centers on the source material, The Mental Architecture of Wealth, which lays out a very clear and, for many, a revolutionary thesis, that financial reality is primarily dictated by internal belief systems. This idea is perhaps best summarized by its core assertion: mindset creates money.
Right, and that very premise provides us with a profound intellectual friction. The central question we're debating is really one of causality and primacy. Is the creation of wealth fundamentally and primarily a function of this internal thought process, this imagined, designed reality that has to come before the build? Or does this perspective, compelling as it is, overemphasize the internal state at the expense of the necessary, practical, and, frankly, highly demanding external behaviors required for actual financial progress?
I hold that mental clarity, belief, and the necessary fundamental shift from a mindset of scarcity to one of abundance is the non-negotiable foundation. It's the causal first step. It is really the root of all subsequent success.
And I come at it from a different way. While recognizing that mindset is undeniably crucial for, beginning the journey, I argue that the actual operational mechanism of wealth creation is ultimately behavioral, the consistent, disciplined application of skills involving investing, saving, and budgeting. Focusing exclusively on belief, it risks minimizing the necessity, the difficulty, and the sheer intellectual rigor required for that consistent action.
The material is insistent on this prioritization, and it starts by redirecting responsibility. It explicitly dismantles the common external arguments. Your job, your paycheck size, or even the political climate are not primarily responsible for your current financial state. Your thinking is. And this isn't just a motivational claim, it's a framework for change. The source uses a powerful analogy. Just as a physical object, a camera, a complex application, or a phone must first exist as a thought, must be imagined, designed, and then built, financial success adheres to this exact sequence. The mental design has to precede and perfect the physical build. Crucially, the source labels the transition from scarcity to abundance as the most crucial mental leap. Scarcity says, I must see the money in the bank to believe I am wealthy. Abundance posits, I believe it, then I'll see it. This mental consistency and the conscious rewriting of the subconscious money story, which dictates our automated financial reactions, that is what unlocks the very possibility of wealth, making it the necessary design foundation for any lasting structure.
That's a sophisticated defense to the sequence, and I certainly agree on the power of rewriting the subconscious money story. The necessity of awareness and reflection, that cannot be overstated. However, the source's assertion that money literally follows your thinking, that requires us to look closer at the transfer mechanism, the bridge between thought and reality. The text identifies fear as the greatest obstacle because it paralyzes action, and conversely, faith is what propels growth. My interpretation is that the mindset shift, the transition toward faith and abundance, is the vital, necessary condition that removes the psychological paralysis. But what actually drives the acquisition of capital? It is the subsequent sustained, disciplined behaviors driven by that faith. Specific instructions like invest even when uncertain, save consistently, and budget intentionally. Thinking dictates behavior, sure, but behavior, executed over time, produces tangible financial results. So the mental shift is the crucial enabler of the process, but the sustained, intentional behavior, applied strategically, is the primary mechanism that physically generates and preserves capital.
I see why you emphasize tangible action, but let me return to the material structural integrity. The design phase must be complete before the building can withstand stress. The material explicitly designates the mindset reset as step one. If you attempt to build, to invest, or budget consistently before resolving the foundational mental flaw of a scarcity mindset, you are building on sand. The source explains how negative subconscious scripts manifest. Individuals either hoard money excessively, terrified of future loss, or they overspend out of a fear-driven impulse to feel successful right now, regardless of their income.
They are destined to, in its words, repeat the same mismanagement. If the subconscious script mandates fear-based financial actions, the behavioral efforts will ultimately fail because the emotional control and mental consistency were never established. For instance, a person with a scarcity script might execute a perfect budget for 3 months, only to panic and pull all their investments during the first market downturn, destroying years of behavioral effort. The mental consistency must come first. The design dictates the ultimate resilience of the execution.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it creates what I see as a misleadingly simple, strictly linear model of wealth creation: design, then build. While I absolutely agree that emotional control is necessary to prevent mismanagement, the idea that the building phase is merely a passive manifestation of belief, it just overlooks the sheer technical complexity involved. The source ties wealth building to precise, quantifiable actions: investment, saving, and budgeting. These are not merely passive outputs of abundance. They are complex skills that require specialized data analysis, economic knowledge, mathematical understanding, and highly structured operational discipline. You can possess a pure abundance mindset, believing fully in your success, but if you lack the knowledge of how to set up tax-advantaged accounts, or how to allocate assets based on risk parity, or how to rigorously audit expenditures, the belief will not generate the results. I mean, isn't it more accurate to view the process as iterative? Belief removes the psychological obstacle, the fear, allowing disciplined behavior, which is applied skill and consistent action, to become the practical wealth creator. And frequently, the successful execution of those small behaviors reinforces the belief.
That line of thinking, though, risks creating a false dichotomy between technical skill and mental control. The source implies that the initial mental architecture is the meta skill, the skill of emotional control and consistency, which then facilitates the rapid acquisition and application of those technical skills. If the subconscious script views complexity, like asset allocation, as intimidating or impossible, the individual will exhibit analysis paralysis and never learn the technical skill, or they'll delegate recklessly. The belief system doesn't generate the results directly, no, but it acts as the master key that unlocks the capacity for the individual to successfully acquire and apply those crucial technical skills. Without that master key, the best budget template in the world is irrelevant, because the script will always find a way to sabotage the execution. The belief system determines whether we see technical complexity as a barrier or as a solvable challenge.
Okay, let's shift the focus toward the operational environment, specifically regarding our second contention: the role of external factors and responsibility. The source is exceptionally valuable in challenging readers to stop blaming external systems and take personal responsibility, arguing that excuses only preserve scarcity. However, we have to critically examine the structural assumptions here. Does thinking abundance genuinely override the fundamental lack of opportunity or the rigid constraints that external systems might impose? The source material itself, when addressing the existence of financial opportunity, specifically anchors its argument in the context of the American opportunity, stating the U.S. provides numerous opportunities. This context suggests the mindset shift is effective and necessary, provided a strong baseline level of external, systemic opportunity already exists. If an individual operates in an environment completely devoid of reliable avenues for investment, job mobility, or entrepreneurship, if the external system is actively crushing ambition, does the internal belief still retain its primary causal force?
And that's a powerful challenge regarding context. But the source addresses this potential limitation by placing the causal force entirely on the individual's mental filter, not on the environment. The text isn't denying the existence of external challenges, it is dismissing the external reality as the primary cause of personal stagnation. The core argument is this: opportunities are always present, though perhaps hidden or unconventional. If one thinks broke, they stay broke, precisely because their scarcity thinking dictates their behavior, preventing them from perceiving or capitalizing on the numerous opportunities the text emphasizes. If the mind is trapped in competition, victimhood, and scarcity, the individual will avoid necessary risks, fail to invest in their own education, and not network effectively. The mental framework functions as a restrictive filter. The moment the filter shifts to abundance, the individual begins acting resourcefully, finding alternative funding, seeking mentors, or starting smaller, unconventional ventures, the mind, specifically its filter for possibility, is the limiting factor, allowing excuses to preserve scarcity, irrespective of whether the opportunity is large or small.
But the difference between resourcefulness and primary causal force is vast. I mean, for the mindset to be the primary cause, it must generate results even where external conditions are highly prohibitive. The material seems to imply an inherent potential within the American system that the mindset merely activates. So, if the argument is that a person with a broken mindset will miss opportunities, what about the highly disciplined person who maximizes every technical opportunity available, but struggles due to persistent systemic bias or wage suppression? Their behavior is flawless, their mindset is proactive, yet the external system limits the outcome. While the source compellingly demands personal responsibility, we must avoid conflating the necessary internal preparedness with the systemic conditions that allow capital accumulation to occur at scale.
If the technical behavior isn't supported by a functioning system, the mental architecture, no matter how strong, yields limited financial results.
A material's response to that scenario would be that the mindset dictates the ability to pivot. The person facing systemic limitations but operating with an abundance mindset will not simply repeat flawless but constrained behaviors. They will adjust the strategy, move geographically, or invest their small resources in a completely unconventional way, precisely because they believe possibility exists outside the current constraints. The mind dictates the strategic behavior, not just the technical adherence to a budget.
That's a good distinction, actually, between strategic and technical behavior. And it leads us directly into our final contention: fear, faith, and practical discipline.
Indeed, let's focus on faith. The source identifies faith as the necessary, active mental engine required to overcome the fear that paralyzes action. This mental fortitude is paramount because true wealth building, consistent saving, intelligent risk-taking, and long-term investing requires committing to processes where immediate, tangible results are non-existent or even negative for extended periods. Think of a market crash. Without the mental consistency to sustain faith in the long-term plan, the required practical discipline, staying invested, buying the dip, collapses instantly. The mental state dictates the ability to adhere to the discipline. Therefore, faith, the internal conviction in the ultimate success of the design, is what makes sustained, difficult action possible. True wealth requires mental consistency first, as it maintains the structure of behavior when the outside world applies pressure.
Okay, I agree that faith provides the necessary scaffolding to withstand uncertainty, but I still refuse to accept that the internal state is the direct generator of wealth, as the phrase mindset creates money literally suggests. If the goal is measurable financial results, the only meaningful metric of success is external and tangible: consistent saving rates, intentional budgeting adherence, calculated portfolio growth. These are not merely the passive results of faith. They are financial practices that require deliberate execution. Couldn't the intense, almost spiritual emphasis on an internal state like faith inadvertently distract from the rigorous necessity of learning and executing the cold, hard, practical financial steps? The danger here is that a listener focuses only on feeling abundant without mastering the mechanics. The question, then, is whether the psychological transformation is merely a prerequisite for or the actual generator of wealth. I maintain it is the necessary precursor. The practical, repeatable, external execution is the primary mechanism that converts potential mental energy into material financial reality.
I think you misunderstand the depth of the claim when you separate the execution from the design. When the source speaks of faith, it means more than just a vague hope. It is the operationalized conviction that drives the system. If a person with faith automates their savings, creates systems for budget adherence, and commits to ongoing financial education, those specific disciplined behaviors aren't separate from the mental architecture. They are the concrete expressions of that architecture. If the mindset fails, the automation stops, the discipline breaks, and the system fails. The mindset is the persistent operating system. The practical behaviors are the applications. The operating system has to be sound for the applications to run consistently and correctly over decades. Therefore, the long-term financial results are indeed a mirror of the underlying mental architecture.
Yet, if we look at real-world examples, we see highly successful people who operate with immense technical discipline, yet still harbor deep psychological fears. They are hoarders, savers, unable to enjoy their wealth. Their behavior produces the results, but their mindset prevents the enjoyment. Conversely, we see people with profound mental clarity regarding abundance who lack the technical skills or operational rigor to manage capital, leading to missed opportunities or quick dissipation of income. This indicates that both are independently necessary. The moment we try to assign primary causality, we risk ignoring the true synergy. Wealth accumulation happens only when the unafraid, clear thinking is rigorously coupled with consistent, disciplined, and technically informed behavior. The material asks us to start with the mind, yes, but the results only appear through the behavior.
In summarizing my position, I return to the source's foundational assertion. Your financial results are a direct, sustained mirror of your mindset. While technical action is required, the material clearly establishes that action is merely the physical manifestation of the internal design, the thought made real through a specific system of beliefs about opportunity and risk. For lasting change that survives recessions and personal setbacks, the core work must start and be maintained within the mental architecture, rewriting the money story, establishing clear purpose, and embracing that, believe it, then I'll see it, abundance mindset.
And my conclusion is that while the imperative to take personal responsibility and overcome scarcity thinking is a powerful and necessary first step, the analysis must not conflate the necessary prerequisite, a clear, unafraid, abundant mindset, with the sufficient mechanism, which is the consistent, disciplined, and technically competent financial behavior. Both are integral elements of wealth building detailed in the source material, but the accumulation of capital happens through the operational, tangible behavior, which is what ultimately produces the measurable financial result.
This discussion truly highlights the inherent tension within the mental architecture of wealth. This pull between the internal world of psychological belief systems and the external necessity of disciplined financial practice. It forces the reader to confront where their personal point of failure currently lies.
Indeed. Leaving the listener to weigh which force, the internal, shaping mental architecture, or the subsequent, executing behavior, carries the primary causal weight in the pursuit of durable wealth.
I want you to conduct a quick thought experiment with me right now.
Okay.
Think about the specific circumstances of your financial life today. I mean, really picture it.
Your income, your savings.
Exactly. Your income, your debt, your savings rate. And maybe most importantly, think about the future you imagine for yourself financially. Now, if you're not where you want to be, who or what is the first thing that comes to mind when you assign the blame?
That's a loaded question.
It is, because for most of us, when we hit a financial wall, that finger immediately points outward.
Right. It's the economy. It's my boss.
It's the rising cost of living, my job's salary ceiling, global politics, the banking system, or just, plain old bad luck. We are experts at externalizing our financial position.
It's a defense mechanism, really.
But what if? What if financial results, both the good and the bad, had almost nothing to do with those external factors? What if the difference between a life of constant stress about money and a life of, empowered abundance was about something entirely internal?
Something that operates exclusively between your ears.
That's it. And that's what we're doing today. We are undertaking a really substantial and frankly deeply challenging deep dive into source material that insists the fundamental truth of wealth creation is mindset.
It's a big claim.
A huge one. We're mapping what the sources are calling the mental architecture of wealth. And this material, it's designed to systematically dismantle every single excuse you have ever relied on.
And it is an uncompromising thesis. The material we looked at sets the groundwork with a statement that is, let's just say it's difficult to process because it forces that radical shift in perspective. It asserts, and I'm quoting here, where you are with your money today is the direct result of how you've thought about money up until this point.
Oof. That is a tough foundational statement. And if we accept it, even just for the purpose of this deep dive today,
Which we have to.
we have to. It demands that we just dismiss all the noise. It forces us to acknowledge that factors like the size of your paycheck or how good your boss is, or even the state of the economy, they're secondary.
They're influences, not primary causes. And that's the absolute crux of the source's argument. If wealth is fundamentally an internal designed construct, then external circumstances are just. They're the environment in which you execute your internal design.
So the foundation isn't your bank account.
No. The foundation of your financial life is not the asset column on your balance sheet. It's the quality of your internal thinking and your belief system. The sources are really clear on this. If you haven't mastered the internal architecture, you will fail in the external environment no matter how many opportunities you're given.
So our mission today is to explore exactly how these internal mental constructs become physical financial reality. We need to get into those unseen subconscious money stories from our childhood that are, pulling the strings on our adult decisions.
And most critically, we have to map in detail the chasm that separates scarcity thinking from abundance thinking.
Because this isn't just some self-help cliche.
Not at all. It's a required architectural blueprint. Yeah. And to really anchor this, the sources provide a powerful analogy.
Let's hear it.
Think about anything complex and valuable around you. Your phone, a piece of software, even the blueprint of a skyscraper.
Right.
Before any of those things existed physically, they had to be conceived. They had to exist as a thought, an idea, a design. They were imagined, engineered, and mentally built before they were ever manufactured or constructed.
That's a great point. You wouldn't hire a construction crew to build a skyscraper without a meticulous, detailed blueprint, would you? Of course not.
Right.
And financial success is no different. It has to be imagined first. It has to be deliberately designed and mentally built with discipline before it can ever show up physically in the form of sustainable wealth.
The problem, as the sources articulate it, is that most people live their financial lives in a constant state of reaction. They're trying to build a financial future without ever reviewing the mental blueprint they're currently operating on.
Okay, so let's really unpack this core concept thought first. The material states that before you even think about opening a savings account or looking at a stock chart, financial success has to be designed mentally.
Right.
So what are the practical implications of skipping that step? What happens if you just jump straight to the tactics?
If you skip the design phase, you default to randomness. Or, what's worse, you default to the flawed blueprint you inherited from your childhood.
Which we'll get into.
We will.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a clear mental image of what financial well-being looks like for you, and I'm not just talking about a number, but a lifestyle, a level of control, a specific feeling, then you have no target. You have no metric for success.
You're just kind of drifting.
Completely. The sources really stress that financial well-being isn't a passive state. It's an active state of being that requires a definition first.
But people love the tools, right? They're very keen on the budgeting software, the investment platform, the debt consolidation strategy. You're saying those tools are basically useless if the underlying architectural design is missing.
They're worse than useless. They can be a distraction. You could have the world's most sophisticated budget, a zero-based budget that accounts for every single penny.
Super detailed.
Meticulous. But if your internal thinking is rooted in self-sabotage or fear or just instant gratification, you will consistently fail to execute that perfect budget. The blueprint is flawed, so the structure your monthly spending and saving will always be unstable.
Okay, now let's tackle the source's really forceful rejection of external blame. They are uncompromising on this.
They are.
Blaming your job, your paycheck, political leaders. They say it's unproductive because the true control mechanism is internal. But let's push back a bit here. Let's introduce some friction. Surely the external world matters.
Of course it does.
I mean, if I'm stuck in a low-wage job in an area with a sky-high cost of living, isn't the external system dictating my lack of progress?
That is the comment. And look, it's an entirely understandable reaction. However, the sources shift the focus. They shift it from the difficulty of the situation to the locus of control.
What do you mean by that?
They acknowledge that external factors create hurdles, sometimes very, very high hurdles. But the choice to accept that hurdle as the final word, or the choice to begin designing a way around it or over it, that choice is always internal.
So blaming external forces, it's like an emotional anesthetic. It numbs the pain of having to take action.
Precisely. Excuses are the ultimate preservative for the status quo. If you successfully convince yourself that your financial struggle is due entirely to a macroeconomic force you can't influence, you've just given yourself moral permission to stop innovating.
To stop learning.
To stop learning, stop trying, stop taking responsible action. The source rejects this because even in the most challenging external environments, the internal choice to seek education, to budget intelligently, or to look for supplementary income streams, that remains entirely in your control. The moment you give up that control is the moment you've failed.
And that brings us right back to that central concept. Money follows your thinking. We've established this isn't some kind of magic.
No, not at all.
We're talking about a causal chain, a loop. Thinking dictates behavior, and behavior produces results. Let's map that loop out in detail.
Okay, so if a person thinks they are always destined to be poor, let's say there's a profound lack of self-worth there or no sense of entitlement to abundance, that thought translates immediately into behavior.
How so?
Well, they might avoid looking at their bank balance because it just causes too much anxiety. They might subconsciously seek out low-paying jobs because they feel safe and they conform to their internal self-image. And they will definitely make impulsive spending decisions because what's the point? I'll never get ahead anyway.
Right. That's the self-fulfilling prophecy. The lack of results is just the consequence of the thought-driven self-sabotaging behavior.
Exactly. And conversely, if a person operates from the mental blueprint that they are capable of building and maintaining wealth, that thought translates into proactive behavior.
Like what?
They seek out professional development, they track their expenses meticulously because they respect their resources, they investigate strategic investment opportunities, and they maintain discipline even when the market is going crazy.
The subsequent wealth, then, is just the physical manifestation. It's the scoreboard of that consistent internal design.
That's it.
So for you listening, your bank balance is just a trailing indicator. The real leverage point is the thought itself. But how detailed does this mental blueprint need to be? Is it enough to just vaguely wish for a lot of money?
Not even close. The sources argue forcefully that it requires what they call the necessity of clarity.
A vague wish is useless.
Totally useless. The mental structure has to be robust. It requires defining things. What is my wealth for? What level of passive income actually provides my freedom? What behaviors must I adopt daily, weekly, monthly to maintain this status? If your mental blueprint for success is vague, the physical building, the actual wealth will be constructed haphazardly and it will collapse under the first bit of pressure.
It's the difference between saying, I want to be rich,
and saying, I want to generate $10,000 per month in diversified passive income streams by the time I'm 50, which requires a specific savings rate of 25% of my gross income and investments directed toward these specific identified asset classes, enabling me to spend 4 hours a day on my creative work.
One is a wish, the other is architectural instruction.
Exactly.
Okay, this moves us into a really fascinating and I think for many people uncomfortable area. The subconscious blueprint, or what the sources call the money story.
The ghosts in the financial machine. I like that.
That's what they are.
And the money story is maybe the most powerful and often the most destructive driver of our adult financial behavior. And it's precisely because it operates outside of our conscious awareness.
So what is it exactly? How do they define it?
It's defined as the deep emotional narrative script that's formed typically between the ages of, say, 7 and 18. It's based on every interaction, every argument, and every feeling surrounding money in your immediate family environment.
So it's not just about how much money you had, but how it was handled.
Yes, and how it was spoken about. That's the key. If you grew up in a household where money was a source of constant conflict and anxiety, the subconscious script written back then often dictates that money equals pain and conflict.
And so the adult self might, push money away.
Subconsciously, yes. They might push money away or manage it really poorly just to avoid the emotional pain that's associated with it. The pattern is so deeply rooted that it just overrides intellectual logic.
And what's fascinating is that the sources detail how these early experiences, whether they involve poverty or abundance or just chaos, create these predictable, lasting patterns. Let's look closely at the two conflicting outcomes for those raised in a scarcity background.
Yeah, this is really interesting. The sources detail the trauma response to childhood lack. When you experience true scarcity, your nervous system codes that experience as a threat to your survival. So the two primary protective but ultimately destructive adult responses are hoarding and overcompensation.
Okay, let's dive into hoarding first.
Yeah.
This is the individual who is driven by that internal alarm bell that's just screaming, the supply will run out again.
Right, and this person might look financially successful on paper. They have high savings, low debt, a huge emergency fund. But their discipline isn't rooted in confidence or opportunity, it's rooted in panic.
So there's a psychological nuance there.
A huge one. They are unable to spend money even when it's necessary for growth or maintenance or genuine well-being. Things like investing in their own education, upgrading essential tools for their work, or even paying for necessary health care.
So their high savings rate is actually a symptom of psychological paralysis. It's not intentional growth.
Precisely. They are suffering from psychological poverty even with physical assets. The sources suggest this behavior is maintained by what psychologists call the availability heuristic.
Meaning?
The constant, immediate memory or fear of past lack is just instantly available. It's right there at the front of their mind, and it overrides any logic about their current financial security. They're basically saving to survive the last crisis, not preparing to thrive in the next opportunity.
Wow. Okay, so now let's look at the complete opposite reaction. Overspending or overcompensation. This seems like a contradiction to come from a scarcity environment, but it makes a lot of sense when you view it through a trauma lens.
It does. This individual is either subconsciously trying to prove that the past fear no longer applies, or they're just repeating the chaotic behavior they witnessed. They spend lavishly to demonstrate, look at me, I am not poor anymore.
Creating a facade of wealth.
Exactly. A facade that requires constant, reckless consumption. Or, and this is maybe a bit darker, they subconsciously believe they don't deserve stability, or that responsible management is futile because they saw their parents try and fail over and over.
So they just default to managing money poorly. They repeat the very cycles of debt and chaos they witnessed because that feels familiar, even if it's destructive.
Familiarity often trumps functionality in the subconscious mind. That destructive pattern can provide a really strange sense of comfort. This is where a concept like cognitive dissonance comes in.
There were two opposing things at once.
Exactly. Intellectually, they want wealth, but their subconscious scripts compel behaviors that confirm their low self-worth or their belief that resources are just impossible to manage. So they self-sabotage their budgets and investments to confirm that negative internal script.
And then we have case study 2 from the sources. The affluent background with poor habits. Growing up with money doesn't immunize you from these scripts.
No, and this is such a powerful counterexample to the idea that environment is destiny. If parents in an affluent setting modeled frivolous spending or avoiding taxes or using high levels of debt, or maybe using money as a substitute for emotional connection, the child internalizes those habits.
And the wealth just dissipates.
Within a generation. Not because of a market failure, but because the successor generation just repeats the deeply ingrained mismanagement patterns they witnessed. They lack the architectural discipline that's required to maintain complex resources.
The critical point the source emphasizes here is what they call the background script problem. These scripts are just running silently, influencing every major decision you make.
They are.
You might logically intend to invest 10% of your income, but when the time comes, this feeling of vague anxiety rooted in a 30-year-old fear that investment is just gambling, makes you spend that money instead.
And that feeling of anxiety, it feels like logic. The emotional root disguises itself as rational caution. This is why the absolute non-negotiable step to transformation is awareness and reflection.
You have to become an archaeologist of your own psyche.
You do. You cannot rewrite a script, a story, a fear, a pattern until you know precisely where and when it was written. And this often requires deep journaling and intentional reflection on the feelings that surface when you handle money, not just the math.
So if I notice that every time I think about, say, discussing my salary with my boss, I get a knot in my stomach.
Yeah.
The immediate goal isn't the negotiation technique.
No.
It's tracing that physical fear response back to its origin in my money story.
Exactly. The source material demands that you treat that emotional response as data. Why does that fear exist? Was money always a secret in your house? Was asking for more money framed as being greedy when you were a kid? Until you read and acknowledge that subconscious blueprint, it will continue to veto your adult decisions.
Okay, we're transitioning now to what the sources identify as the definitive architectural choice. This is the big one. The contrast between the two dominant mental models, scarcity versus abundance.
This is the operational system. This is what determines your financial trajectory.
And they're not just motivational posters, right?
No, these are hardwired belief systems about how the universe and resource generation actually operate. We really need to dissect them psychologically because the difference in the results they produce is just, it's dramatic.
Let's start with a deep dive into the scarcity mindset. The core driver is fear and competition. So how does that translate into a belief about the world?
The scarcity thinker believes the world is a zero-sum game. Resources are fixed, they're limited, And the competition to acquire and hold on to them is brutal. And this belief system is constantly reinforced by media narratives, by economic crises. It creates this feedback loop of anxiety.
The sources list 3 really corrosive scarcity statements. Let's unpack them. The first one, there's not enough, seems to be the baseline assumption.
It is. This is the fundamental anxious conviction that prevents action. It suggests that even if you manage to acquire some resources today, they will inevitably dwindle.
So you can't even enjoy success.
You can't. It leads to hoarding or, paradoxically, to reckless spending because the outcome feels preordained. Failure. There's no joy in achievement because the anxiety about the future instantly diminishes any present success.
The second statement is where that external blame becomes really central. They just got lucky.
Ah, yes. This is a powerful self-protective mechanism. When the scarcity thinker sees someone else succeed, a colleague, a competitor, a celebrity, they have to immediately neutralize that success.
Why?
Because if they acknowledge that person succeeded through discipline or effort or superior thinking, it would force the scarcity thinker to admit that they themselves could also have taken those steps. And then the blame would have to come back internally.
So they dismiss it.
They dismiss external success as pure random luck. This preserves their state of inaction, it protects their ego, and it confirms their victim narrative.
That's a fascinating psychological function. It prevents them from having to take responsibility. And the third, and maybe the most toxic statement, if they win, I lose.
This defines the competition. Because the pie is fixed, every success story out there is a direct subtraction from their own potential. This mindset breeds paranoia, resentment, and a complete inability to collaborate or celebrate other people.
So it's isolating.
Terribly isolating. It turns opportunities for synergy into perceived threats. If a neighboring business succeeds, the scarcity thinker isn't inspired to improve. They're convinced that the successful business is taking their customers and their market share.
And behaviorally, this is the paralyzer. This is what leads to the avoidance of risk. Give us some concrete examples of how this scarcity thought process manifests as inaction.
Okay, well, it creates analysis paralysis. A scarcity thinker will spend 6 months researching the perfect investment vehicle, waiting for the absolute bottom of the market, and ultimately do nothing.
Because they're afraid.
They're afraid the loss will be permanent. They won't take the chance on starting a side business because the expense of the initial supplies feels like a non-recoverable debt. And they often avoid the simple, high-impact action of giving, even small amounts, because they perceive giving as a physical loss, which just confirms their belief that they have nothing to spare.
All right, now let's transition to the abundance mindset. If scarcity is fear, abundance is rooted in faith, belief, and gratitude. How does this architecture define resources differently?
Fundamentally differently. The abundance thinker views the world as expansive and generative. Resources, ideas, money, opportunities, value, they're constantly being created and circulated. They believe that value creation is exponential, not linear.
This isn't just blind optimism.
Not at all. It's an operational belief that dictates continuous learning and risk management.
And what's the core difference in how they view other people's success?
This is crucial. They view it not as a subtraction from their own potential, but as proof of possibility.
Oh, I like that.
If their competitor lands a massive deal, the abundance thinker doesn't feel diminished. They feel encouraged. They're thinking, okay, the market is open for those deals. How can I adapt and position myself to earn the next one? They're focused on modeling success, not resenting it.
And the behavioral outcomes of that confidence.
It promotes what the sources call wise stewardship of current resources, coupled with the deep confidence that more is on the way.
Stewardship. So you respect what you have.
You handle your existing money with respect. You budget, you track, you save, not because you fear losing it, but because you value it as a tool for future creation. And the confidence part means you're willing to make strategic investments because you trust your capacity to earn and generate value will replenish whatever you spend on growth.
This brings us to the crucial mental leap. This is the philosophical difference that is really the centerpiece of the source's argument. This is where the rubber meets the road between the two mindsets.
It is. It is the difference between operating based on physical evidence and operating based on internal conviction. The scarcity mindset demands, I must see it to believe it.
Mean what?
Meaning I must have the perfect market conditions, the guaranteed job security, the fully funded savings account before I will take the action of investing or making a career change. The evidence must precede the commitment.
But abundance completely flips that script. It requires a commitment that generates the evidence later. I believe it, then I'll see it.
This is the moment of the cognitive leap. The abundance thinker commits to the action. They invest, they launch the business, they pursue the education before the evidence of success is guaranteed. The belief system generates the consistent, disciplined, proactive behavior, and that sustained behavior eventually creates the positive financial evidence.
That's a huge shift.
It's the most crucial mental leap in wealth creation, according to the sources. It's where your belief system has to override the physical evidence, especially when that evidence is temporarily discouraging.
It sounds like the abundance mindset requires a much higher tolerance for uncertainty.
Absolutely. It requires the psychological fortitude to act in the absence of a guarantee, based on the fundamental assumption that effort, value creation, and discipline will produce results over time. The scarcity thinker is paralyzed by the 20% chance of failure. The abundance thinker is motivated by the 80% chance of success, and they plan how to mitigate that 20% risk.
So if the core choice is belief over evidence, then we have to confront the primary antagonist in this whole story, fear.
Right.
The source material is very, very clear. Fear is the single biggest paralyzer of action and growth.
Fear is the system administrator for the scarcity mindset. That's a good way to think about it. It activates all these protective mechanisms that are designed for physical survival, but they are deeply detrimental to financial growth.
So it shows up as analysis paralysis.
Yes, you cycle endlessly through research and justification, perpetually delaying the required step. It also shows up as that availability heuristic we mentioned. A single sensationalized headline about a market crash is instantly more powerful than 20 years of data supporting slow, consistent growth.
Fear keeps the individual small and financially stagnant. It preserves the status quo, even if that status quo is painful.
It's the silent killer of compounding returns.
Yeah.
Exactly. Fear keeps people from negotiating salaries. It keeps them from asking for sales. It keeps them from diversifying resources because diversification feels like fragmentation, which feels dangerous. The moment you let fear dictate your financial choice, you have chosen to preserve a negative financial reality.
The sources contrast this destructive fear with its counterpart, which they define as the propellant of growth. Faith. Now, we need to be careful and define this correctly for the listener. This is not strictly a spiritual concept.
No, it's a specific functional financial expectation.
Explain that.
Financial faith is a deep, confident expectation that leads to concrete, disciplined action. It's the conviction that if you adhere to the proven principles of value creation, saving, and smart investing, you will be successful over time. It's the belief in the mathematical process, in compounding, in consistency, and in your own learned ability to execute.
It sounds like trusting the laws of financial physics.
Precisely. If you put value into the market, you trust that value will be returned to you. This kind of faith requires daily commitment. So let's outline the specific disciplined actions that this faith compels people to take, actions that scarcity thinkers consistently avoid.
Okay. First up, investing. This is arguably the highest stakes area where fear just dominates.
It is. The scarcity thinker sees market volatility and they run for the hills. The faith-driven individual sees market volatility as a temporary condition. Their action says, I will take the step to invest consistently, maybe through dollar cost averaging, understanding that long-term discipline outweighs short-term volatility.
So investing is an act of conviction.
It's an act of conviction in the future, a choice to bet on the enduring health of the economy, and crucially, on your own sustained participation in it.
Okay, next, saving. We noted earlier that scarcity thinkers hoard out of panic. So how does the faith-driven abundance mindset approach saving differently?
The abundant saver practices intentionality. Saving isn't a defensive crouch against a catastrophe. It's an active preparation for opportunity.
That's a key distinction.
A huge one. They save specifically to fund future investments, to start a business, or to seize a moment of market downturn. Their savings reflect respect for future opportunity and resources, not a desperate clinging to current security.
And what about budgeting? Something that's so often framed as deprivation and restriction.
For the scarcity mindset, budgeting feels like constantly saying no, which just feeds that narrative of lack. For the abundance thinker, budgeting is an expression of intentional, disciplined management.
It's a tool for direction.
It's an exercise in directing resources to their highest and best use, which includes giving, investing, and enjoying life. It's the disciplined act of asserting control over your resources, rather than just avoiding the numbers and letting money drift away to random, non-intentional spending.
And finally, perseverance. The sources highlight that true wealth is rarely built fast, which makes perseverance a key element of the mental architecture.
It is. Wealth creation is a long game. Fear gives up quickly. It gives up after the first budget failure, the first bad investment, or the first slow quarter in a side business.
But faith keeps you going.
Faith maintains consistency even when the results are small or temporarily invisible. It requires the internal conviction to sustain effort for years, trusting the long-term compounding effects, because the internal belief in eventual abundance overrides the immediate discouraging evidence. This is where the emotional control of the abundance mindset becomes absolutely critical.
It lets the discipline win.
It allows disciplined behavior to consistently override the impulsive fear responses dictated by that subconscious money story.
We really need to revisit and expand on the segment about personal responsibility and external systems. The sources are addressing an American audience, and we have to handle this segment with care. We have to acknowledge the reality of external challenges while maintaining that focus on internal control, just as the source material demands.
Right. And this is where the thesis is at its most challenging. The author demands a radical degree of personal ownership.
They do.
The sources acknowledge the existence of flaws, systemic inequality, challenging tax structures, recessions, but they immediately pivot, stating that externalizing blame, regardless of how valid the critique is ultimately a disempowering choice for the individual.
Okay, let's break that down. Why is the choice to externalize blame so damaging to the individual, even if the blame is, factually accurate?
Because it places the solution outside of your sphere of influence. If you successfully argue that your lack of wealth is exclusively due to the actions of the Federal Reserve or the policies of Washington, you have simultaneously relieved yourself of the responsibility to act.
You're off the hook.
You're off the hook. You are now waiting for an external change to rescue your internal circumstances. And the sources argue that this surrender is the single most common reason why people with intellectual capacity fail financially.
Okay, let's introduce some necessary nuance here, because we have to acknowledge that systemic issues are real. Predatory lending, wage stagnation, high student debt loads, these are not imaginary. They create immense hurdles.
They absolutely do.
So how does the abundance architecture instruct someone to react to these genuine external pressures?
The abundance mindset is not about ignoring reality. It's about choosing the most productive response to that reality. The sources argue that even in the face of legitimate systemic pressures, the internal choices, where to live, how to budget, what skills to acquire, how to invest your time, those remain the most powerful levers available to you.
Can you give an example?
Sure. For example, if you're faced with crushing student debt, the scarcity mindset sees only the mountain of interest and feels paralyzed. That often results in avoiding extra payments or even defaulted loans. The abundance response is tactical.
How so?
Acknowledge the debt, strategize its reduction ruthlessly through aggressive budgeting or finding supplemental income, and treat the debt as a temporary problem that can be overcome through disciplined action and learning. It's the difference between being a victim of the system and being a strategist working within the system.
The sources present a counter-argument they call the opportunity argument. While the system has its flaws, the U.S. context specifically provides vast opportunities for those willing to shift their mindset and take ownership.
They really emphasize this. The availability of information, the access to global markets, the avenues for commerce and value creation that just don't exist in many parts of the world. Therefore, the individual's greatest roadblock is usually internal paralysis, that scarcity thinking that prevents them from seeing, pursuing, or sustaining effort toward these existing opportunities.
So the problem isn't the absence of oxygen.
It's the personal choice not to breathe. That's a good way to put it.
The system provides the playing field, but the individual has to provide the architecture, the design, and the daily effort. Which brings us back to that central, non-negotiable causal chain. If you think broke, you stay broke. If you think abundance, you'll build abundance.
And that chain is so potent because the thinking generates the required follow-through. The person who thinks broke behaves passively. They avoid high-value relationships, they accept their paycheck as the hard ceiling of their income, and they react to every market fluctuation with panic. They are confirming their internal narrative through their external behavior.
Whereas the person who thinks abundance is always seeking the next layer of value.
Yes. They seek education, not just to learn, but to implement. They look for ways to generate multiple streams of value. They might use debt strategically as leverage, not as a crutch for consumption. Their money follows their thinking because the discipline and intentionality inherent in the abundance mindset force them to make external moves that others, who are paralyzed by fear and blame, simply will not make. The results are just the ultimate proof of the quality of the internal architecture.
So to summarize the practical steps here, the sources are crystal clear, foundation first. They reference a hypothetical training program or course, and they emphasize that step one is unequivocally mindset.
It has to be.
You can't overlay sound financial mechanics onto a mind that is designed for sabotage.
This hierarchy is non-negotiable. Trying to learn sophisticated options trading while you still believe money is evil or that you're destined to fail, it's just a waste of time. The flawed internal architecture will ensure the external technique is misapplied, rushed, or sabotaged entirely. The mindset is the operating system. The financial tools are just the software. If the OS is corrupted, the software won't run.
So the mindset reset involves two critical and, let's be honest, difficult tasks for the listener. The first is that deep archaeological work of rewriting one's personal money story. How does a person concretely do that?
Okay, this requires procedural, sustained effort. First, identification. You have to identify the emotional triggers. Sit down and write out the top 5 things your family said or did repeatedly about money, where the phrases, "We can't afford that," "Money is the root of all evil," "It's better to be poor and happy."
You have to get specific.
Very specific. Second, dissection. Analyze how those phrases dictated your specific behaviors today. Avoidance, panic, overspending, whatever it is. And third, active replacement.
This is the rewriting part.
This is the rewriting. When the old script surfaces, say, the thought, "Investing is too confusing and scary," you must immediately consciously replace it with an intentional counterstatement. It's often called an affirmation, but it has to be rooted in observable fact or a chosen action.
Give me an example.
For example, I am consistently learning the fundamentals of investing, and my current discipline is creating future security. This takes tremendous cognitive discipline. You're forcing the new blueprint over the old programming.
This sounds less like just positive thinking and more like conscious cognitive interruption and redirection.
Exactly. It's about building new mental muscle memory. And the second critical task is that immediate conscious transition from scarcity to abundance thinking, that leap from seeing to believing to seeing.
How does a listener monitor that transition in real time? It sounds abstract.
It happens in micro moments. When a coworker announces a big success, you have to actively check your immediate emotional response. Is it resentment? That's scarcity. Or is it curiosity and inspiration? That's abundance.
And with purchases.
When you consider a major purchase, do you approach it with paralyzing guilt, which is scarcity or hoarding? Or do you approach it with strategic inquiry? Can this purchase generate value or joy, and how will I budget for it intentionally? That's abundance and stewardship.
So it's about being mindful in those small moments.
This active monitoring and interruption is the daily exercise that rebuilds the architecture. It moves you from the default setting of emotional victimhood to the intentional position of financial owner. The sources conclude that lasting financial change begins not in a bank account, but in the mind. It begins with a deep, honest reflection on your current financial beliefs and a conscious decision to design a better future.
And crucially, recognizing that your financial ceiling is determined only by your mental capacity to design and commit to that different future, rather than by some arbitrary external limit.
The challenge is that the most necessary changes are internal and invisible, which makes them really easy to put off. But deferring the mental shift guarantees the perpetuation of the current financial reality. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow. This exploration into the mental architecture of wealth has been genuinely demanding. I mean, it requires a level of introspection that most financial advice just completely avoids.
It does.
Let's synthesize the core insights before we wrap up. First, financial results are a direct, measurable mirror of your mindset.
What's inside shows up outside.
Exactly. Second, changing your thoughts is the absolute prerequisite for changing your actions. Third, fear is the primary block to opportunity because it demands physical evidence before you can act.
And abundance begins with the confidence and belief, the faith that allows you to act before that evidence is fully solidified.
The consistent thread through all the source material is that non-negotiable requirement of personal responsibility and the internal design of a robust belief system.
Couldn't have said it better.
So for you, the listener, who has been absorbing all this architecture, I want to encourage you to identify one specific negative script or emotion that surfaced during this deep dive. Was it the fear of running out? the cynical dismissal of others' success, the paralysis caused by confusion.
Find that one thing.
Find that one thing. Write down that specific phrase, that toxic sentence, and recognize it as an outdated subconscious script that you now have the power to consciously interrupt and rewrite.
And finally, let's leave you with a provocative thought to mull over, extending beyond the personal money story and into the societal. If our financial beliefs are largely formed by family dynamics in childhood, how much influence do broader cultural or media narratives have on keeping people locked in a collective scarcity mindset?
Oh, that's a big question.
It is. I mean, narratives that frequently sensationalize debt, highlight economic despair, and frame success as an impossible lottery win.
Think about that. The societal architecture of wealth beliefs. If your personal discipline is the foundation, what role does the collective mental environment play in either supporting or undermining that foundation?
That's something to explore and analyze further.
Thank you so much for sharing your sources and letting us take this incredibly deep dive with you today.
It was a pleasure. We'll look forward to our next exploration.